My name is Stefan Russ-Mohl, and as some of you at least may know, I'm a journalism and media management professor at the University of Lugano in Switzerland. Well, that was printed in the program, but most proudly I am also the cooperation partner of the Albanian European Journalism Observatory, which is run by Arton Fuga and his crew here at the university, and which aims, together with about a dozen other partners in Europe and in 10 different European languages, to make research results from media research accessible to journalists, to media practitioners, to students, particularly to advanced master and doctoral students like you. And besides making such research results accessible and therefore more useful, we also hope to bridge a little bit the cultural gaps within Europe, which means all of us know a lot about our own journalism culture. Usually we know a little bit about some things which might happen in the Anglo-Saxon world because we know at least a little bit of English, and usually we know close to nothing about what's happening in all the other European countries. And that's kind of something which we try to change, and that's also something which I will try to change a little bit with my presentation this afternoon. Which means I had this wonderful opportunity, thanks to a great translator, to get a basic idea how public and private television and broadcasting are working in your country this afternoon. And now I would like to present you some insights from my home country, Germany, from the United Kingdom, simply because the BBC tends to be still the, how would you say, the lighthouse of public broadcasting all over the world, and from my present guest country where I'm teaching, from Switzerland. And Switzerland may be even of more interest for you because it's, like Albania, a small country, while the two other countries are far too big to be compared directly with the situation which you have here. My question, by comparing these three journalism cultures and these three cultures of public broadcasting, is simply, is public broadcasting still generating public value? Is it still serving the public interest? And I will try to present you several suggestions as food for thought. And these suggestions will be dealing somehow with the question, are we serving the public interest or are we serving the public's interest, which makes a little difference. The public's interest is what our that is what our audiences kind of would like to know, and the public interest is what our audiences as citizens possibly should know. So there's a little conflict in between here. And I would also like to point out why, on the one hand side, public broadcasting may guarantee journalistic quality and journalistic professionalism, at least in the three countries I am taking a closer look at. This is certainly still the case, and I would not like to live in a, let's say, American culture where, thank you, where, basically there is no relevant public broadcasting. On the other hand, I would like to point out that public broadcasting in a convergent media world will most possibly endanger media pluralism, simply because public broadcasting in a converging media world may be the only leftover media company which still has a lot of money due to the kind of tax-like income they are getting from all of us, while all the other competing private media companies are more and more struggling for advertising income, which is going to Google and to Facebook and elsewhere, but no longer to news websites. And so, I have mixed feelings about the future role of public broadcasting. And I would also like to make you right at the beginning aware of the very fact that this is one of these topics which are very difficult to discuss rationally at all. Even among researchers, it is, to my experience, very difficult to discuss about the sense and nonsense of public broadcasting. Most of us have very strong, biased and opinionated perceptions pro or contra public broadcasting, and there is far too little differentiation and much too much polarization, even among media researchers, and even media researchers who are supposed to be scientists and are supposed to know how to handle statistics and how to look at data. They usually have a lot of problems in simply being cost conscious when we are discussing public broadcasting. Public broadcasting tends to serve the public interest, so we can throw as much money as they want and as they need at them, and nobody is discussing whether that makes sense at all. Now, I will try to differentiate, and I would like to present several suggestions as food for thought, and feel free to interrupt me if you want to discuss right away. So I'm aware that we are supposed to have most of the discussion at the end of my presentation. My first suggestion is simply size matters a lot if we look at public broadcasters. And giants like the BBC or like the ZDF in Germany, or also even the regional WDR, Westdeutscher Rundfunk in Germany, are having a lot of different problems compared to your small public broadcaster in Albania or our small public broadcaster in Switzerland. And I would like to come back to this, but keep that in mind. Simply, if you are a giant like BBC or like ZDF, you will inevitably be also a huge bureaucracy, and there will be inevitably all the problems which usually big bureaucracies create. And let's keep that in mind. I don't have numbers for your own public broadcaster here in Albania, but the BBC is really a big operation with 20,000 employees still, after it has already been reduced in size. And the German ARD is even still bigger, while the German second public television, ZDF, still has 3,600 employees. And in Switzerland, as we have a public broadcaster who has to serve in television programs 3 language areas and in radio programs 4 language areas, we also are pretty big with 6,000 people working for public broadcasting. If you compare these numbers with newsrooms of newspapers or so, well, you kind of know already that it is kind of uncomparable. But even with the most private television stations or so, it's just incredibly big. Now, suggestion number 2 is that competition matters. I don't want to bombard you too much with numbers, but I think you should at least know the market shares of the public broadcasters in the 3 countries we are looking at, and they are still in all the 3 countries pretty strong, these market shares. In the United Kingdom, the BBC still has close to 32%. In Germany, the ARD, with all its, they have by now kind of dozens of regional and specialized programs, they still have more than 25%, and the ZDF has a market share of 13%. So that is, well, there is still a larger market for private television and radio, but overall it is a strong powerhouse which we should keep in mind. Now, in Switzerland, the situation is a little bit more complicated given that we have these 3 major language areas. In the German-speaking part, you can see here the program number 1, 19%, the second television program 9%, and the info television 2%, which is also pretty high numbers, simply because all the competitors in such a small television market like the German-speaking Swiss television market are foreign competitors. There is little room for local or regional private competitors if you have such a giant like SRF in my present country. And in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, it changes compared to the German-speaking part, once again a little bit, and in the Italian-speaking part once again. But basically, these public broadcasters do have inside Switzerland a television and radio monopoly. The private, well, let's say a television monopoly. In radio, it's not that costly, so you can. We do have some competition, but the major competitors in Switzerland are simply foreign competitors either from Italy here or in the German-speaking part from Germany and Austria, and there is very little local competition inside the country. Now, as I pointed out already, in this convergent, digitalized media systems, all privately owned media become direct competitors of public broadcasters. Why is this the case? Simply because all the media are step by step moving online, and media consumers, particularly you, the young people, are more and more using tablets or cell phones as the major channel, and if you are online, there is simply no longer a distinction between print or text on the one hand side and television or video on the other side, or podcasts and radio. A good website will have all these elements, which means for all the print-oriented, traditional, private media, it becomes extremely difficult to provide the videos, the film material, which they would need to survive as web operators and to compete with the public broadcasters who have all these pictures. So here I think we are running into deep, deep trouble, and that's something which should be much more discussed in public. My suggestion number 3 is directly related to what I have said so far. The broadcast fees may really destroy the competition among different media companies, and thus they may destroy media pluralism in the long run. Here you simply see how much the red part of my columns is most important. That's the money which the public broadcasters earn from our contributions, which are more and more becoming taxes, at least in Switzerland and in Germany. Now everybody has to pay this, even if you don't have a television set in your home, if you don't have a computer in your home, you still have to pay this tax, and this means simply that the public broadcasters have a lot of money to spend, while the private competitors have less and less money to spend. Now, my fourth suggestion corresponds directly with what we have heard this afternoon about Albania, and it's not that much better even in these countries I am talking about. There is political influence wherever the government is collecting money from all of us. It will also try to influence public broadcasters. Germany, as an example, one editor-in-chief of the ZDF, Mr. Brender, has been, even after a very successful tenure, he has been dismissed simply because the Conservative Party, which controlled the television the television company, didn't like him any longer. Another big problem from my personal side, if you care for independent public broadcasting, the former spokesperson of our Chancellor, Merkel, is now the CEO of the Bavarian Broadcasting Company, so of one of the three biggest public broadcasters which we have in Germany. And just to complete the picture, the former anchorman of the ZDF news show, of the ZDF television program Heute, Mr. Seibert, is now the spokesman of Ms. Merkel. So there is direct interchange and job hopping from one sector to the other. And to believe that people like Seibert or Wilhelm will really be independent journalists, as former or present spokespersons of the Chancellor, well, you can be very naive, but I am not so naive. I don't believe it. If you look at the BBC, it's not that much different. The BBC, particularly since the last elections, was accused of being politically very biased. These attacks came mainly from the political right in Britain, but it doesn't matter whether you are on the right or on the left. Political parties always tend to attack the public broadcasters, and not only to attack it by suggesting that they are biased. Well, if all sides are attacking them for bias, then maybe they are doing a good job, but it's not just such attacks, it's also, of course, the permanent pressure they are exercising on the journalists and making life difficult for those journalists who try to be independent. Actually, there are not that many journalists who even try to be really independent, because all of them know that without support from either the left or from the right-hand side of the political parties, they just can't make a career in public broadcasting. And in Britain, the BBC several times over the last years had to take away movies or features which were announced in the program but then not offered to the public simply because of political pressure. You'll find such stories once you start to dig a little bit everywhere, I think. How does that work? I think if we hop back to Germany, and if we are looking at ARD and ZDF, you should simply know that the supervisory boards are more or less parallel parliaments, which means whoever gets into these supervisory boards, even if they are not directly affiliated to political parties, somehow members of parliaments will decide who will get into the board, and therefore the board members simply don't have the independence which they would need for their job. You'll always find politicians which get high positions in public broadcasting, and well, we talked already about the Brender case. Another, I don't want to go too much in details. Believe me, it's like that. Here we have, no, what is now wrong? Okay, suggestion number 5, however, is that if you look at this political picture, at this picture of exercising political influence, we have in Switzerland and also in Germany something which is really very helpful, federalism. And federalism makes a difference, because this means simply that in each of these regions you have a local or regional public broadcaster. There is some local and regional political control of these public broadcasters. However, at the national level, all these local and regional public broadcasters are contributing together to the national program of ARD, the first television program in Germany. And so the political influence, which tends to be strongly conservative in Bavaria, and the political influence which tends to be strongly social democratic in North Rhine-Westphalia, in the territory of the WDR, will somehow be counterbalanced. And in Switzerland, with the 3 language regions, we kind of have a similar situation that basically it becomes more difficult for the central governments to really exercise directly influence here. However, the principle is cuius regio eius religio, which means if the government has been for the last 20 years conservative, you can bet that also the public broadcasting top management will be mainly conservative. Another system which helps to provide at least partial independence in the German public broadcasting system is the so-called, and here I simply don't know whether it works similarly in Britain or in Switzerland, but just to show you this example, what we call in German the Reißverschlusssystem, the zip fastening system. How do you fill top positions in public broadcasting? And there is a kind of iron rule. If the top guy is from the right-hand side, his deputy must be either green or a social democrat. So there is some balance built into that. And now this system works towards more independence of the public broadcasters in the case the 2 top decision makers cooperate, because then, well, it becomes much more difficult for either the left-hand side or for the right-hand side to attack the public broadcaster. However, if they don't cooperate, and they don't always cooperate, but if they don't cooperate, this will also create some some self-blockage. Would you have other comments about the risks of such a system? I would see one more risk. The zip fastening system means basically that the two most powerful, usually opposing parties are controlling the public broadcaster, but there remains little room for all the smaller parties, which means the competition and the marketplace of ideas, which is needed so urgently in a democracy, may not work. To the contrary, this may lead to a kind of grand coalition which suppresses minorities instead of giving room and access to them. My suggestion number 7 is that the supervisory boards, well, we discussed that already in another context, are pretty weak. The still probably best practice example, which works better than in other public broadcasters, is the BBC Trust, where we have 11 trustees from different backgrounds, 2 journalists, 2 politicians, one from the Conservative Party, one from Labour. Once again, the SIP system, as you can see here, a television executive, a film researcher, a cultural researcher, a marketing manager, a Harvard professor, a curator, a banker. So that is a pretty nice mix, which might help to at least create some independence. And then there is also this royal charter of the BBC, the constitution of the BBC, which at least describes on paper the principles of independence. Well, we have heard this afternoon already that, in German we would say, Papier ist geduldig, paper is patient, and not everything what is written in paper will be implemented in reality. So let's remain even here pretty skeptic. And it gets worse in Germany, where the representatives mainly are chosen from political parties, from the state governments, from different communities. These different communities may help, so religious groups they're in. If you have one responsible it's clear. If you have 15 people and each of them is equally responsible, it's highly probable that none of the 15 really cares, and so you create this situation of organized irresponsibility by trying to balance political influence. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Suggestion number 9, public service is endangered from within. And here my best example is simply the astronomical salaries which top public broadcasting managers receive. If you compare the salary of the BBC CEO with the salary of the British Prime Minister, the CEO of BBC earns more than double as much as the British Prime Minister. And the same situation in Germany. The CEO of a regional public broadcaster will earn a lot more money than the German Chancellor Merkel. We are talking about public service. Incredible. If you want to have all the privileges which are foreseen for public service, then you can't hand out the same amount of money to the top managers, which is handed out to private in private media companies. In private media companies, it's really risky to be at the top. You may lose your job within weeks or months, and in public television or public broadcasting, you usually stay and stay. Well, maybe if the political the government changes, then you might also lose your job. Endangered from within, let's also be aware that these huge bureaucracies create their own rules, And as these huge bureaucracies have to compete with still have to compete with private television, and as private television is really pretty good in attracting audience, so inevitably there is the danger of goal displacement. If the public broadcasters really would serve their mission to serve the public interest, their shares of audience would collapse, and they know this. And the money they get can be only justified if they have a high share of audience. So basically, at least at the prime time, they have to offer very similar programs as any private broadcaster would have. And that leads to a situation where public and private broadcasters, for example, compete for the rights to present to all of us the soccer championship, which we are enjoying right now, or they are competing for the most expensive show stars. And well, the public broadcasters are basically wasting our money by paying much too high prices for all the kind of things which we would get anyway from private television. So the high quality information may be endangered. If you look at the programs which are offered by public broadcasters, there is very little left in terms of contributing to educating people. Educating people, that was in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, but it's not any longer a strong motivation for public broadcasters. Do they at least help to integrate minorities into our societies? Well, if you think about the system, how the top positions are being handed out to people who are basically partisan in this or that direction, it's not very probable that they are doing a pretty good job here. And in terms of transparency, I'm afraid, well, here I have to say that the BBC, for example, is trying probably more than Murdoch or other private media companies, but still, how can it happen that a guy like this pedophile moderator stays undiscovered and continues to work for the BBC for years or so? It just shows that it was a big bureaucracy, and it had the same problems which any private company would have had as well. And in terms of complaints management, I still think that the New York Times is doing a much, much better job with its ombudsman, with its public editor, than any public broadcaster I would know in the world. As all of you know, and as I mentioned a minute ago, scandals have also weakened public broadcasters. Here are some mentioned in which the BBC was involved. Some others can be mentioned if we look at ARD and ZDF, and all of this tells us simply that, these public broadcasters are not that much different from whatever private broadcasters or private media companies are doing. Another suggestion, public spending, and now I'm not only talking about the fees which all of us are paying, I'm also talking about government subsidies which are handed out to media companies. All this public spending in the media sector is not oriented towards innovation. There was a wonderful study done by the Reuters Institute in Oxford 3 years ago, a comparative study which simply showed that due to lobbying efforts, the powerful old media industry got all the subsidy money which was provided by the governments, and new startups, new internet ventures simply did not get any money. So let's be aware that the government is not a very good actor when it comes to promoting innovation, to promoting new forms of journalism in the media sector. Final conclusions. I still think that it's nice to have public broadcasters like the BBC and also like the German and the Swiss ones, but whether it works or does not work is mainly a question of culture, and this culture is something which cannot be created within 1 year or even not within 10 years. It needs a long time spent. It is a strong educational effort to create the kind of professional and public service mentality which is needed to make such public broadcasters work. And part of the culture is also, and that's something which we may have to learn in Switzerland, because as some of you know, we recently had a public voting which tried to kick out foreigners out of the country. So democracy is much more than just majority rule. Majority rule is important, but it needs to be counterbalanced by minority rights. And if we look only at majorities, well, this may well lead to a situation where the populists in the media and the populists in politics create a win-win situation for themselves, and after a couple of years, very little of a democratic system will be left. Part of the professional culture which needs to be developed is, and that has really to start in journalism education at institutions like your university, to create mentally distance to political parties. When I was myself, as I was young, of course, I was politically engaged and I wanted to change the world. But when I got at age 35 my first professorship offered at the Freie Universität of Berlin, and all overnight became responsible for the journalism education there, I simply sent my party book back to the Social Democratic Party and said, this is it, from now on I want to be independent, I can't serve as a journalism educator with a party affiliation. That was also a difficult move looking backwards, because creating that independence for me, which hopefully had also a positive effect on my students, had backlashes when many years later I would have needed political support for my journalism mid-career program, which I had built up in Berlin. And well, given my status as an independent person who did not want to have political affiliations, neither with the conservatives, nor with the Social Democrats, nor with the Greens, I also had all of a sudden no political support for our efforts to create independent journalism education and independent journalism mid-career programs. And this explains, by the way, why I ended up in Switzerland and discontinued my work at the Freie Universität in Berlin. So let me stop here with this personal confession. But this hasn't changed my attitude. I still think if we want to be professional journalists, we have to fight for our independence, and this rule number one is keep distant from political parties. And rule number two, if you engage in public service, in public broadcasting, you have to behave also as a public servant, which means you have to be modest in the kind of salaries which you expect. On the other hand, you should have some job security, which also contributes to your independence. But this kind of public service culture has been rapidly disappearing, at least in Germany and in Britain as well. Thanks a lot. I hope